Hey everybody, Jimmy Smith back this time with an actual UFC breakdown. Can you believe that? That's right, we're pre-UFC 307, which is statistically, which is, you know it by just looking at it, but it's statistically true. The oldest UFC in UFC history, meaning the average age of the fighters, is higher than any average age in UFC history. So there's a reason for that. There's a lot of old versus young. Can the young buck overcome the old lion type stuff? And there's a certain nostalgia aspect to this card. I think part of the deal, and it could just be coincidence, but there have been some cards that have been good, not great recently from the UFC when it comes to pay-per-views and non-pay-per-views. And so I think there's a little bit of nostalgia right now for an era of the UFC that's a little bit older. And some of these fighters cater to that era, especially Jose Aldo. But I think there's a little bit of that in play right now when it comes to this matchmaking. But still going to give you my picks and give you the odds and all that fun stuff. We start off on the main card, Roman Dolidze versus Kevin Holland. Right now, I'm getting my odds from DraftKings. Roman Dolidze plus 140 to Kevin Holland's minus 166. So Kevin Holland, a minus 166 favorite over Roman Dolidze. The most underrated attribute of a great fighter is consistency. I don't just mean in the fight itself, but also obviously in the training room. You gotta be there every day, regardless of whether you do well or whether you do poorly. You can't be up and down with your attention and with your performances. And the problem with Kevin Holland I've always had is really physically talented, right? Really explosive, but he has these great performances followed by, at best, so-so performances. In some cases, just outright duds. He has a really inconsistent record in the octagon. When he beat Jacare, and I was a big fan of Jacare, I think he's probably the greatest fighter to never get a title shot in the UFC. When he knocked out Jacare, I was very, very impressed at 185 pounds. What happens? He ends up kind of falling off and having some losses at 185 that Derek Brunson, Marvin Vettori, goes to 170, has some so-so performances there. He's just never gotten over the hump. That appears to be pretty much the high point of his career, 21-5 at the time when he beat Jacare. And after that, it's win some, lose some. All right, losing streaks, winning streaks. He just doesn't have the consistency to really be elite in the UFC. Now, when he does have great performances, he reminds me a little bit of Bobby Green, where he'll have these amazing performances that are highlight reel stuff, followed by a couple of losses. So he doesn't have the consistency to be really great, in my opinion. He's just a little too up and down. And Roman Dolidze is a guy at 185 who's kind of the opposite. He's not spectacular in any particular way, but consistency is pretty good. His losses, he lost to Marvin Vettori, he lost to Nasruddin Imavov, and those were decisions against grinders. So even against consistent guys, he didn't lay an egg and end up getting beaten up by either guy. Competitive fights, went the distance, got docked a point in the Imavov fight. That may have cost him the decision. I don't remember the scorecards off the top of my head. But this idea that even against grinders or really tough guys, he tends to do pretty well. Kevin Holland has this problem of being physical and explosive and dynamic. Has a decent ground game. He's comparatively well-rounded. And then he'll follow it up with a performance where you're just, what's going on here? And not that it's necessarily great guys. Khamzat Chimaev, I understand him getting housed by him, but against a guy in Wonder Boy who's fighting on this card as well, we thought Wonder Boy might be over the hill. It's a good chance for Kevin Holland to kind of get and he got beat up in that fight. So it's the inconsistency of Holland. Whenever I see Holland as a favorite, especially more than 1.5, I got to go with the opposition. And he's a minus 166 favorite in this fight. I got to go with Roman Dolidze, probably by decision, just simply because he has that style where he can put physical pressure on you, has decent stand-up, and can win close rounds. I got to go with Roman Dolidze by decision over Kevin Holland. Caitlin Vieira, Kayla Harrison, I know exactly what the UFC was thinking booking this fight. And a lot of times when you want to make picks in fights, one of the things you want to look for is, all right, what does UFC want? Why are they booking this fight? Caitlin Vieira lost to Raquel Pennington. That was her last loss. It was 2 fights ago. Competitive fight, but she lost against the champ. It's kind of this barometer. She has a win over Holly Holm in her last 4 or 5 fights. So it's this idea that you have a name who's pretty good, considered, elite, up near the top, and it gives us an idea of where Kayla Harrison is after the blowout over Holly Holm, which you could write off as Holly Holm's over the hill, right? You can write that off. So it gives her an opportunity to stay in the minds of the fans. Title's on the line, the same card. So it kind of gives the fans all right, where is she compared to the winner of the title fight, which I'll get into in a minute. It's exactly what it's here for. Kayla Harrison is a freaking monster. I picked her against Holly Holm. I did not think it would be close, and it was not. In all my years of covering MMA and various other sports, I've been able to meet some really great athletes in my life. Every now and then you meet an athlete and you go, holy God, how are you physically real? Cyborg is one of those athletes. You meet Cyborg and you go, it's just stunning every time I see her. Saw her at the last Bellator I did. No, the one before that in San Diego. And she's just a monster, a physical monster. And you just can't visualize a lot of fighters physically competing with her. Then I met Kayla Harrison. Now, I had interviewed Kayla Harrison a lot on my SiriusXM show. Really great woman. She's awesome. Love her to death. But I never met her in real life. I was at a Bellator, and I met her. And she's built differently than Cyborg. But you get that same kind of, whoa. I hugged her, and she's just built like a brick house, built differently than Cyborg. She's not as tall, she's not as shredded and lean, but she's just stocky and unreal strong. And I hugged her and, hey, how you doing? And I felt her. I was like, this is one of the few women I've ever met that I go, okay, I can see you physically competing. I'm not saying she'd win, but she can physically compete with Cyborg. And now she's at 35, and she's monstrous. And she has the skill. She has the pedigree, 2-time Olympic gold medalist in judo. And her ground and pound is there. Her stand-up is good, not great, but when you can beast fighters to the ground the way she can, doesn't have to be great. It has to be good enough to stay on the feet. And I think that's something she has that Ronda Rousey didn't, which is Ronda Rousey, I think at one point really believed she was a boxer. She really believed, and I think her coach may have messed up and put that in her head, that she could box with anybody, and she ended up doing it a little too much. Kayla, I think, knows her striking solid. I think the loss to Larissa Pacheco might have been the greatest thing that ever happened to her because it taught her where her vulnerabilities are. And she knows where her strength is, which is get you on the ground and beat the crap out of you. She is a massive favorite in this fight, like minus 800. She's not worth a bet unless you're willing to put your house on her. But it's to make her look good on the same card as the title being on the line. She'll be in the octagon with the winner, and they do a face-off. And it's a setup fight for Kayla Harrison to look good. Now, it's not a scrub opponent. It's not. But stylistically, it's a bad matchup. It's somebody who has fought the champ before, but she's been up and down in the last few fights. So this is a perfect opportunity for Kayla Harrison to really shine and set herself up as a contender. So that's what it's for. I got to go with Kayla Harrison, probably early over Ketlen Vieira, first round knockout TKO. So Jose Aldo versus Mario Batista. Jose Aldo coming back to the octagon. Batista right now on a 6-fight win streak. He beat Ricky Simon by unanimous decision his last time out. And that's the biggest name so far of his career. Now, Ricky Simon's a tough dude, so that's not a knock on him at all, but he hasn't faced a lot of elite-level talent. Jose Aldo has only faced elite-level talent his entire career. The guy is just unbelievable. He's right off my Mount Rushmore. I think he's like 5th or 6th on my list all time. He's unbelievable. So I still have him number 1 at 145 pounds all time. I put him ahead of Volkanovski. You can argue about that in the comment section if you want, but I put him number 1. So also, this is a guy, and I think a lot of people don't appreciate enough what he did, which is had a run at 45, went down to 35, and had competitive fights against really elite guys at 35. He wasn't what he was. But the idea that a Jose Aldo, who was 70% of what he was in his prime, was still a competitive 35er in a division that requires a lot of speed and they're super explosive and all that stuff, and he was able to hang with those guys, right, and was a contender. Of course, lost to Merab Dvalishvili after a 3-fight win streak, beat Rob Font, beat Pedro Munoz, beat Marlon Vieira. Tough dudes. Really tough. The only guy who looked a level above him was Petr Yan. And that's understandable. Petr Yan was really clicking on all cylinders at the time. That was for the Bantamweight Championship. And so anyway, unbelievable. Beat Jonathan Martinez his last time out. But what gets me about this, the fight was in May. That was his first fight in like a year and a half, almost 2 years. And inconsistency of his schedule is just a problem at that age, right? Just at the idea that he's just been through a lot of fights, 38 years old, which in MMA at that weight class, 35-45, is not a spring chicken. That's pretty old. I'm looking at the odds right now. It is Batista -1.5, -148-ish. That's about right. Got to go with Batista on that, especially he's on a 6-fight win streak. This is another one where the UFC is only going to make so much money off Jose Aldo at this point, right? Probably his last fight, win or lose. He's just not going to fight that much more. What do? You put him against somebody that we can invest in the future. So I think the UFC is seeing this as not a setup fight, not that it's easy, but hey, get behind Mario Bautista if he's able to beat Jose Aldo, and I think he does on a 6-fight win streak. He's just going to have physically a little too much. Does he finish Jose Aldo? Probably not. Simply because Jose Aldo has still shown he's got a pretty good chin. His stand-up is still decent, but does he have the speed and volume to win a decision against Batista? I don't think so. I thought Martinez in his last fight just looked a little shell-shocked. Looked a little like, oh my God, this is my idol. Well, I can't fight that way if you're fighting Jose Aldo. You got to go after him. And I think that's exactly what Batista's going to do. Batista wins by decision. So, moving on, once again, it is Raquel Pennington versus Juliana Pena, women's bantamweight championship. Raquel Pennington, solid. She's just a solid fighter. 135 for the first time in its history has a champion that isn't a star. From the beginning, it's been stars. When Ronda Rousey is your first champion at 135, Miesha Tate, Holly Holm, these big names. Obviously, Amanda Nunes, who's on my Mount Rushmore of MMA. So it's always been a star-studded champion at 35. It's always been somebody that was really big. And Raquel Pennington is just solid. Here's what's happening, essentially. Juliana Pena is a challenger whose mouth will make the fight interesting. Obviously, she has the win over Amanda Nunes, one of the biggest upsets of all time. That's the only fight she's looked great in. She's solid. She's good. She's looked great one time. And as I said about Kevin Holland, at the elite level, I look for consistency. And she doesn't have that. She hasn't consistently looked great. Of course, Amanda Nunes, well known, the rematch just overwhelmed her. It was too much for her in every single round. So this is one of those where they're looking for names at 35. There aren't a lot of them. And the fact that she is, 3-3 in her last 6, longest win streak is 2. That was Amanda Nunes and Sarah McMahon. And also the time off is a killer. She hasn't fought in over 2 years. All that put together, and Raquel Pennington's pretty consistent. She's consistently really good. And I think that's going to be a little too much for Pena. It'll probably be a unanimous decision for Raquel Pennington. Wouldn't shock the hell out of me if Pena was able to pull it out. We don't know what she's been doing for 2 years, if she's been in the gym and adding to her repertoire and all that stuff. Maybe she has a win in her. But I would go with Raquel Pennington based on her consistency and based on the fact that she's physically pretty good. What they're setting up is Kayla Harrison. No matter who wins this, and right now I'm leaning Pennington, that's my pick by decision. Kayla Harrison is that next level. She's a potential superstar, really strong, good-looking, articulate. That's who they want at the top of 35. So this fight is really just the appetizer. The main event is going to be, at some point in the future, Kayla Harrison versus the winner of this fight. So that's what the UFC is trying to set up. That's what they're really into. But I think it's Raquel Pennington. I think she retains probably by decision. Moving on to the main event, Alex Pereira over Khalil Rountree Jr. These odds are insane, which is -520 for Alex Pereira. Do I think Alex Pereira wins? Yeah. If you want to add some juice to this, I would say a knockout in the first 2 rounds would be mine, simply because Khalil Rountree is going to stand and bang with Pereira. Going to stand and bang with him. Pereira just hits like you stole something from him. He has a good sense of range, a good sense of timing. The problem I see here is when other people have broken this down, they've said Khalil Rountree, he's got to take Pereira down. He's not a great wrestler. He's not. So it's not as though Pereira has no idea how to stop a takedown. He does. He also has short-range power, right? What I mean by that is Chuck Liddell, who's probably the best sprawl and brawler of all time, number one, did wrestle D1, so he is a decent wrestler. But he had these powerful shots, the uppercuts and the hooks. And what they do is they keep a wrestler from dropping their head or keeping their head in close range for extended periods of time. And once he hits you one of those, even if it doesn't knock you out, it makes you go, oh man, I'm not doing that again. And that short-range power, Pereira has that in spades. he has these weird shovel punches and these weird uppercuts and hooks, much like a prime Chuck Liddell, where you don't see them coming and they sneak in, and he has lead in both hands. The guy can just knock you out from anywhere. So even if Khalil Rountree says, I'm going to grapple this whole time, dude, you didn't win a national title, right? You're not a great wrestler. And Pereira controls range very well, and he hits really hard. So it's going to be hard for, even if he wants to, Khalil Rountree to take this fight to the ground. Now, in a kickboxing battle, can Khalil Rountree win? Sure he can. He's a very versatile kickboxer, and hey, if you stand and bang long enough in MMA, those small gloves, somebody can get through and knock you out. It is possible. So at minus 520, which is effing absurd, what can you get on Khalil Rountree? Plus 390, all right, 4-1 money. I wouldn't mind a side bet on Khalil Rountree, right? It's a kickboxing match. Hey, he's a versatile kickboxer, does have power. All right, maybe he sneaks out the knockout win. Also, Pereira's a little older. Pereira hasn't been in MMA that long, or there is the inexperience factor, relatively, although every fight he's had has been championship level, basically. So there are a lot of things where, hey, man, at those kind of odds, I'd put some money on Khalil Rountree Jr. Sure, that's a great side bet. You got to go with Pereira facing another kickboxer. Any kickboxer, Pereira's going to have the automatic advantage. He's world class, and he has real power. And Teddy Atlas says something very interesting in boxing. He says, when somebody becomes a world champion, they get 30% better, right? Their confidence, their belief that they really belong there. Pereira's been a champion in 2 divisions and has laid waste to his opposition. Right? He doesn't just beat you, he knocks you stupid. And that power has translated so well at 205. It's incredibly rare that somebody's able to take their power up a weight class. And I think he's gotten more powerful at 205. The guy's absolutely incredible. So he believes he's number one and can beat anybody in the world, and that's very, very important. So Khalil Rountree Jr., with those odds, yeah, throw a side bet on him. You got to go with Pereira if you want some juice for your money. I would say a knockout in the first 2 rounds. So it's an old card, but it's a fun one. Let me know what you think in the comments section. Appreciate all of you.